Good morning and welcome to our class today. It is business as usual. I want us to check on something which is very important, very crucial. And what we want to look at is gaseous exchange in insects. So we're going to look at gaseous exchange in insects. Gaseous exchange in insects. So before we can be able to actually begin our discussion today, I want us to first understand that insects form the second largest in terms of population in as far as animals are concerned. And these insects we are actually talking about are found under a kingdom called Kingdom Animalia. And they are found under a phylum called phylum Arthropoda. That is to tell you that their bodies are segmented. And they are found under a class, or they're actually put under a class called class Insecta. So they have a small body size, and that tells us that they are going to have a large surface area to volume ratio. Try to imagine comparing the body size of a grasshopper or a locust or a butterfly or a housefly and that of an amoeba. You see, an amoeba is found under a kingdom called Protoctista. Protoctista, or sometimes people refer to this kingdom as Protista. So an amoeba is a unicellular organism. It can't get seen by a naked eye, and it is found under a kingdom called Protista or Protoctista. And you're comparing that amoeba as an organism under kingdom Protoctista and another organism like an insect, like a butterfly or a housefly, that is found under a kingdom called Animalia, class Insecta, and phylum Arthropoda. These organisms are found in different kingdoms, but this tends to be unicellular. In other words, in an amoeba, you'll only require a process, a physiological process called diffusion for the purposes of what we refer to as gaseous exchange. That tells you that oxygen can diffuse into the body of the amoeba across the plasma lemma or the cell membrane or the plasma membrane. Then carbon dioxide can diffuse out of the body of this amoeba across the semi-permeable membrane of this organism. So simple diffusion can work well for the amoeba in as far as gaseous exchange is concerned. In that process, the organism can end up exchanging gases across its membrane through simple diffusion. Simple diffusion works well if the organism has a large surface area to volume ratio. So let's proceed. And we are going to actually end up looking at this other category of organisms, the insects. How do they end up having their gaseous exchange taking place effectively? Even if they have also a small surface area when compared to the amoeba, you can actually realize that they require an elaborate transport system that can facilitate their gaseous exchange. In other words, if I go to the body of an insect, I'll realize that an insect has tubular structures. An insect has air tubes. An insect has structures that resemble tubes, open tubes, running throughout its body. Those tubes are called air tubes. And those air tubes form what you call a tracheal system. In simple words, The gaseous exchange system in insects is made up of air tubes that ramify the whole body, that run through the whole body to ensure that each and every part of the insect's body has an access to oxygen and as well can be able to eliminate carbon dioxide as a waste product. So the process ends up having a system called a tracheal system. So the system penetrates each and every part of the body of the insect. And through that process, all parts of the body can actually have an efficient gaseous exchange system. Now, the tracheal system of an insect that forms the breathing system for that matter is able to consist of three very important structures. We've actually talked about air tubes, but you can be able to actually tailor down and be able to give three very important parts that can form what you call the tracheal system of an insect. For your information first, know that an insect has what you call segments. We have 10 segments, for example, in the abdominal cavity and 3 segments in the thoracic cavity. We have actually talked about the head, we've talked about the thorax, we've talked about the abdomen. So an insect has 3 body parts: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. Unlike in some other organisms, like a tick, where the organism has 2 body parts. The head and the thorax are fused to form something called cephalothorax. And then lastly, we have what we call the abdomen. So a tick is found under a class called arachnida. Arachnids, such as the tick, the spider, the mite, the scorpion, do not have 3 body parts. They have 2 body parts, such that they have their head and their thorax fused to form cephalothorax, and then the abdomen. So cephalothorax and the abdomen are the 2 body parts that make up a tick, a spider, a mite, or a scorpion. Now, if you come to this other category, you'll realize that an insect having 3 body parts, the head, the thorax, and the abdomen, has air tubes ramifying its body, running throughout its body to ensure that each and every part of the body of this insect has an access to oxygen and can as well be able to eliminate or expirate or exhale carbon dioxide as a waste product. Remember, I've told you that the thorax of this insect has 3 segments. The abdomen has 10 segments. So in total, most insects has 13 segments forming their bodies. But now, which are the main parts that form the tracheal system of an insect? Number 1, we have what you call the spiracles. Number 2, we have what you call the trachea. Then number 3, we have what you call the tracheoles. The tracheoles. So we have what you call the spiracles, we have what you call the trachea, and we have what you call the tracheoles. Those are the 3 main parts that form what you call the tracheal system in as far as an insect is concerned. To begin with, if I have this as my insect, and drawing can make our understanding very easy. So we have what we call the head, what do we call the thorax, and then we have what we call the abdomen. Head, thorax, and abdomen. You'll realize that these openings that are onto the body of this insect are the ones we refer to as the spiracles. Correct. So the external openings present on either side of the abdomen and thorax of an insect through which air from the outside, you see, gets applied into the body, or through which air from outside enters the body of the insect, are called spiracles. The openings, listen to this. The openings on the abdomen and the thorax of this insect. The openings on the abdomen and thorax of this insect. These openings on the abdomen and the thorax of this insect are the ones referred to as the spiracles. They allow air into the body of the insect. You see? And remember, each opening is supplied with a muscular valve. Let me actually pick this to be my opening. Is supplied with a muscular valve. So muscular valve. And this is now the opening. So this is a muscular valve. And this is now the opening, called the spiracle. So each spiracle has a muscular valve. So each opening has a muscular valve. And that muscular valve controls the opening of the spiracle. So that is to tell you that spiracles don't just open throughout as the insect takes in oxygen and takes out carbon dioxide. The opening and the closing of those spiracles or those openings is controlled by the muscular valve. So the muscular valve can either contract or relax. Look at this. If this is the opening, let me say this is the insect, there is a muscular valve. So this becomes the muscular valve. And this becomes the opening. So this muscular valve controls the opening and closing of this spiracle so that insects can effectively take in oxygen and give out carbon dioxide during their breathing process. Now, apart from that, we'll realize that the body of insects also have hairs that are called hairy structures. The hairs on the body of insects, look at this. This is my insect, like a grasshopper or a locust, and the body is able to have hairs. Look at that. The hairs ensure that the insect does not lose excess water from its body tissues by evaporation. Remember, the insect gets exposed to the environment, the temperatures might rise. If its body temperature rises, the water inside its body can get turned into vapor because of a higher temperature. The water can get, at the end of the day, lost to the environment through evaporation. So the work of the hairs is to trap a layer of moisture, and that prevents excess loss of water from the bodies of these insects. If it were not for the hairs, then the insects would end up losing excess water in form of vapor to the surrounding. Try to imagine an animal, because an insect is an animal, ending up losing excess water to the surrounding through evaporation. What will happen to this organism? The tissues become dehydrated. We always say that when the cells of an animal lose water, in as far as cell physiology is concerned, they will end up becoming dehydrated. When the cells become dehydrated, they actually crenate, or they undergo a process called crenation, the shrinking. And when they shrink, that means their functioning is hampered metabolically. They cannot perform their function effectively. That's why cells must not be dehydrated. They must not lose excess water to the surrounding. Now, remember, once you've talked about the spiracles, I've told you that there are three main parts that form what we call the tracheal system of an insect. We've talked about the spiracles, the external openings on the body of the insect, on both the thorax and the abdomen. The next part to talk about is the trachea. So the spiracles have to open into tubes called trachea. And I told you every spiracle has a muscular valve to control its opening and closing. Then from the spiracle, you're going to call the trachea as the muscular openings. So these are our trachea. So the spiracles open into the trachea, which are arranged in definite patterns. They get arranged in definite patterns to just make sure that there's efficient gaseous exchange taking place. So the trachea have to emanate from the spiracle, the opening. They find their way into the body of the insect with definite patterns, and they actually penetrate the whole body space of an insect. Now, on the surface of this trachea are spiral bands. Spiral bands of chitin. The spiral bands of chitin ensure that these tubes get kept open. The tubes don't end up collapsing. They have to get kept open so that they can allow efficient gaseous exchange from taking place. Assuming this is a pipe, like the trachea of a human being for that matter, you see, and the trachea has to allow oxygen pass through it, you see, to the bronchus, then the bronchus, then the lungs. My friend, then you end up having your trachea collapsing. You'll actually just die. So along the surface or on the walls of the chitin, either in human beings or in insects, are spiral bands of chitin. Chitin is a polysaccharide. It's actually a carbohydrate falling under a category called polysaccharides. Polysaccharides are made up of many molecules of glucose. So the work of this chitin is to keep these tubes open so that they don't collapse, to ensure there's efficient gaseous exchange taking place. Correct. So the trachea have spiral bands of chitin on their walls to ensure that they get kept open for efficient gaseous exchange to take place within the insect. Remember that the trachea further subdivides. The trachea further subdivides. The trachea further subdivides into finer tubes called tracheoles. So these finer tubules are called tracheoles. Very good. So we first have the spiracles to the outside, or the openings on the body of the insect. They actually lead to what we call the trachea. The trachea have what we call spiral bands of chitin to keep them open and ensure efficient gaseous exchange. Then from the trachea, what we call the tracheoles. The tracheoles are the finer tubes that are able to ensure that each and every part of the insect's body has an access to oxygen and can as well be able to collect carbon dioxide as a waste product. So at the end of the day, the tracheoles lack the spiral bands. So these tracheoles do not have the spiral bands. So they are not reinforced at any point to ensure that they don't collapse. They do not have any spiral bands of chitin, so they ensure that along their walls, they can actually permit efficient gaseous exchange to the cells of the body of the insect. So if this is my tracheole with no spiral bands of chitin along its wall, it can actually allow carbon dioxide to diffuse out of the cells and into the tracheole. Then as well allow oxygen from this tracheole and into the cell. So their walls are semi-permeable. They can allow carbon dioxide from the cells and into them. Then oxygen from the tracheal tubes and into the cells along the walls. That ensures that there's efficient gaseous exchange taking place. Now, let's see, how does gaseous exchange take place in insects more efficiently? We want to explain how oxygen can find its way to the cells of the insect and how carbon dioxide can be able to get moved out of the body of this insect. Let's proceed. Now, first, if this is my insect, I would rather use this diagram to explain better. So we talked about the spiracle with muscular valves. The hairs are also found on the body of the insect to prevent them from losing excess water through evaporation. And these spiracles open into what you call the trachea with spiral bands of chitin to prevent them from collapsing. Then from this we have what you call the tracheoles. The tracheoles are actually finer tubes that branch from the trachea. Very good. So again, the trachea, then tracheoles, okay, then the trachea, then the tracheoles. So you can actually have this getting explained in this manner. Air is drawn into and out of the tracheal system by muscular movement of the abdominal wall. Remember, The abdomen of these organisms is made up of segments, and these are actually muscles. The muscles can actually be able to move. You can actually be able to see some movements as far as the abdomen of insects is concerned. So that muscular movement of the segments of the abdomen can facilitate efficient drawing in of oxygen and removal of carbon dioxide. For example, if you look at some insects like wasps and bees, you'll realize that these insects have their abdominal segments. Let me talk about this being the head. Have their abdominal segments. The abdominal segments moving in and out. So the insects have the abdominal segments, now the wasps and the bees, moving in and out lengthwise. Look at that. So these abdominal segments will move in and out lengthwise. And as they move in and out lengthwise, you'll actually find oxygen getting drawn into the trachea through the spiracles when the muscular valve opens the spiracle. The muscular valve opens the spiracle, oxygen is drawn into the trachea of this wasp or bee when its abdominal segments or when their abdominal segments move in and out lengthwise. That means along the length of their bodies. In some insects, like locusts, you'll find that they will have the same movements of the segments as the cockroaches. These two types of insects have their segments moving laterally. They can ask you one day, explain the movements of abdominal segments of wasps and bees and locusts and cockroaches. Say, wasps and bees have their abdominal segments moving in and out lengthwise. But now in locusts and cockroaches, the abdominal segments have to move laterally. You know, lateral line, you see. And at the end of the day, that means these segments are able to facilitate air getting drawn in. So at the end of the day, whether the segments are moving in and out laterally or lengthwise, oxygen gets drawn in when spiracles open. Now, once oxygen has been drawn in, the valves have to close. Look at that. Oxygen is forced along the system of the trachea through what we call the muscular movements as well. While the oxygen gets more of the forcing to move along the length of this trachea, it actually ends up moving itself, you see, into a watery fluid and dissolves in that watery fluid. Because you can try to imagine, you see, these gases must first dissolve into the moisture, into that watery fluid. So any watery fluid within the body of this insect can accommodate the oxygen. So once the oxygen has actually diffused into the body of this insect through the abdominal segments movements, and because of the muscular valves opening, the spiracle, the oxygen dissolves into that watery fluid. Once the oxygen has dissolved into that watery fluid in the tracheoles, then what happens? The oxygen leaves the tracheoles and finds its way into the cells of the body of the insect. So, the abdominal segments move either lengthwise or laterally. The muscular valves open, the spiracle, oxygen diffuses into this trachea. It is actually able to get pushed along this trachea through the muscular movements of the abdominal segments. The oxygen dissolves into the watery fluid of the tracheole, then from this fluid and into the fluid of the cells through simple diffusion across the membrane of the tracheole. Look at that. Likewise, carbon dioxide from the cells will diffuse from the watery fluid of the cell and into the tracheole. So remember here, Oxygen is diffused from a region of high concentration in the tracheal watery fluid to a region of low concentration in the watery fluid of the cell. Likewise, carbon dioxide from its higher concentration in the cell diffuses from this cell to the watery fluid of the tracheal across this membrane. So simple diffusion works well for the insect. Now, at the end of the day, the carbon dioxide moves from this tracheal to the trachea. Remember. Then these spiracles of the thoracic cavity will close. Remember. Then the spiracles of the abdomen will open. So when the spiracles of the thoracic cavity close, the spiracles of the abdomen open, and carbon dioxide can get released to the atmosphere through the spiracles of the abdomen, where the spiracles of the thoracic cavity have actually been closed. Look at that. So the thoracic spiracle valves close as the abdominal spiracle valves open, releasing carbon dioxide to the environment. For example, you'll find some insects living in water. Those insects that live in water also carry out gaseous exchange while they're in water. It doesn't matter. They don't need to come out of the water and actually find their way on land before they can actually have gaseous exchange taking place. So at the end of the day, if give an example of the dragonfly as an insect and the nymphs, you see, you'll actually realize that the dragonfly or the mayfly larvae nymph are examples of insects that use what we call the tracheal gills to facilitate their gaseous exchange. How do they look like? If I look at a dragonfly, of course, it has to actually have what we call a pair of antennae. This can be the head with compound eyes. Remember, insects are actually found under a class called class Insecta, with a pair of antennae, 3 body parts, several segments, 3 segments in the thoracic cavity, and 10 segments in the abdominal segment area. So you can actually end up having them having 3 pairs of legs. Those are 6 legs in total. So some characteristics of insects include having a pair of antennae, having both compound and simple eyes, having 3 body parts, the head, the thorax, and then maybe the abdomen. You see, and you'll actually have 3 segments in the thoracic cavity and 10 segments in the abdominal cavity. Those are 13 segments in total, and they are what we call 3 pairs of legs. Those are 6 legs in total. So, regardless of what we're actually talking about in terms of the insects, remember the dragonfly insects and the mayfly larva nymphs found in water breathe through what we call tracheal gills. The tracheal gills, I can actually write here first, tracheal gills. The tracheal gills are actually positioned as paired plates on either side of the abdomen. Look at that. So, dragonfly and mayfly larva nymphs use tracheal gills while in the water as paired plates on either side of the abdomen to facilitate their gaseous exchange. But some insects still, so these are what you call the tracheal gills, but some insects still, while still in the water, can still use what you call the tracheal system to facilitate their gaseous exchange. So it doesn't matter. They can still use what you call the tracheal system to facilitate their gaseous exchange. But now in this case, they need to come first onto the surface of the water. So that from here, when muscular valve open, they actually open the spiracle. Oxygen from the atmosphere can find its way into the body of the insect through what you call the trachea, then the tracheal, then from the tracheal to the cells of the insect. So most of these insects using the tracheal system while in the water are not truly aquatic. They need to come first onto the surface of the water for them to actually facilitate their gaseous exchange. Now, sometimes when they actually come onto the surface, for example, you can talk about the mosquito larva. You see, they have what you call their spiracles near the rectum on a tube called a respiratory siphon. You see? So you can actually have a drawing to just explain this. So this is your mosquito larva. You can have this as your antenna. Then you can have this as the head. You have what you call the compound eye. You can have here the mouth brushes. Mouth brushes. You have what you call the antenna. And you can have this as its body. This can be the spiracle. It's called the anterior spiracle here. So anterior spiracle. Then you can have the abdomen, what you call the hairs aiding in the floating process. So this can be the surface of the water. You see, so you have hairs aiding in the floating of this organism. So this mosquito larva floats in water, and the hairs aid in the floating process. So you have what you call the anterior spiracle and the posterior spiracle. So it has two main types of spiracles. The anterior spiracle closer to the head, and the posterior spiracle closer to the anal gills. So at the end here, you have what you call the siphon. The siphon is close to the anus. And on this siphon, you have what you call the anal gills. Anal gills. The antenna has a pair. The mouth brushes onto the head. The compound eye, you have what you call the anterior spiracle on the thoracic cavity. You have what you call the posterior spiracle on the abdominal cavity. You have what you call the siphon as a tubular structure just to the posterior end of the body of this mosquito larva. And you have what you call the anal gills on that siphon that can actually aid in the gaseous exchange process. So you'll realize that the siphon is opened. Look at that. When the larva comes to the surface of the water, this siphon is actually able to get opened. And when this siphon is opened, it can actually be able to allow the valves to close when it actually gets submerged into the water. I don't know if you're actually getting that point. When this mosquito larva comes onto the surface of the water, remember it's floating by these hair structures aiding the floating process. So the organism does not just float on the water on its own. It has what we call hairy structures on its body surface to aid in its floating process. So in the process, when it comes onto the surface of the water, the siphon is opened by the valves. When it submerges, the valves close the siphon. You see? So the larvae comes to the surface of the water to breathe, as it's actually positioned in this manner. When it's actually taken in enough oxygen, it submerges. So on coming onto the surface of the water, its valves open the siphon. Oxygen is taken in. When it submerges into the water, the valves again close the siphon. No breathing occurs when it's actually under the water. So it periodically comes onto the surface of the water. The valves open the siphon takes in water with oxygen, and then when it actually submerges itself into the water, the valves close the siphon. No breathing occurs when it's actually under the water. That's how it actually periodically ends up breathing in and breathing out as the insect survives in the water. Now, what happens is, especially in this stage, when the organism has moved from this larvae stage, I've told you, at its larvae stage with hairs aiding in its floating, the mosquito larvae can come onto the surface of the water. The valves can open the siphon can take in oxygen, or breathing can occur. When this mosquito larvae submerges into the water, the valves close the siphon, no breathing takes place. But once it has actually been able to undergo what you call metamorphosis to form what you call the pupae, what happens? A pair of siphons just behind the head pierce through the water surface to allow for gaseous exchange to take place. A pair of what? Siphons pierce through the surface of the water. So you can realize that as the organism grows and develops, you can actually end up having something different occurring. A pair of siphons can pierce through the water as the organism is still submerged in the water, and this can allow gaseous exchange to take place. So remember here, it must come to the surface of the water. The valves must open the siphon for gaseous exchange to take place. The siphon is located at the posterior end of the body of this organism. At the pupae stage, what happens? A pair of siphons just behind the head pierce through the water to allow gaseous exchange to take place without any difficulties accompanying the breathing process of this organism. Now, remember, in some organisms like the water beetles, you'll actually realize that they'll end up having their breathing taking place in somewhat different manner. How? What happens is this. The organism has what we call hairy structures on its body surface. And the hairy structures have water bags. So let me actually give you just a practical example here by having a drawing getting made. Let me say this is my water beetle. Remember, there must be 3 body parts. Forget about the proportionality of those structures. So we have what we call the hairy structures. And these hairy structures are what we call water bags. Water bags. So these water bags are attached onto the hair structures of these organisms. So some adult insects, I repeat this, such as the water beetle, this is an example of a water beetle, have hairy structures covering their body surface. But on top of those hairy structures are what we call water bags. Water bags. The water bags use bubbles of air trapped by hairs on the body surface. So at the end of the day, you realize that there are hairy structures on the body of this insect. On top of those hairy structures are water bags. Then on top of that, these hairy structures trap air bubbles. Those air bubbles give these insects their silvery appearance, their silvery attractive appearance. But again, we will not actually rely on the air trapped by these hairy structures to facilitate their gaseous exchange. Still, the insects such as the water beetles must come to the surface of the water to facilitate their gaseous exchange. They don't rely on the air trapped by the hairy structures attached on the water bags for gaseous exchange. They must also come onto the surface of the water to facilitate gaseous exchange. So they'll always periodically be able to come onto the surface of the water to replenish their bodies with oxygen and remove carbon dioxide to the surrounding. So they actually come onto the surface of the water to replenish their stock of air, which is oxygen, and remove carbon dioxide. So other insects will use what you call a respiratory plastron. A respiratory plastron is able to allow these insects to actually have what you call gaseous exchange taking place. What is a respiratory plastron? Let me pick this as my insect. This is the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. I told you there are 3 segments on thorax and 10 segments on the abdomen. On the body of these insects, some of these insects are what we call hairy structures. A mass of hairy structures on the surface of these insects' bodies can be able to get referred to as respiratory plastron. They are washable hairs. The hairs are actually attached onto the surface of these insects. The bodies of these insects have what we call non-washable hairs. Those non-washable hairs cover the cuticle for some distance around the spiracle to hold off water and also to maintain a layer of air over the body surface. So just close the spiracles. Just close the spiracles are non-washable hairs. The hairs cannot be washed away. The hairs can't be washed away by the water. So if the hairs can't be washed away by the water, that means they can trap some water. So they maintain a layer of water just around the spiracles. and again a layer of air, so the air can diffuse in the body of these insects effectively. You might get told to give an explanation to this one day. How does a respiratory plastron facilitate gaseous exchange in insects? I've told you some insects have non-washable hairs on their body surface. These non-washable hairs on the body surface of these insects is referred to as a respiratory plastron. These hairs are non-washable. They trap some water and maintain a layer of air just around the spiral coils, so that this oxygen can diffuse into the bodies of these insects and allow carbon dioxide to get out of the bodies of these insects. As well, to ensure there's what you call an effective gaseous exchange, they can replenish their stock of air in their bodies when these non-washable hairs trap water and maintain a layer of air around the spiral cords. Thank you so much for your listening, and this is the end to our discussion as far as gaseous exchange in insects is concerned.